Psychology in Seattle. So, Berto, do you know Lance Armstrong? You know who that is?
I do. Cyclist. He was my hero.
He was.
Well, I mean, one of my heroes.
Interesting.
Many heroes.
Interesting.
But I always admired him so much because he had beat cancer. He was like this ridiculous, out of the norm athlete, won all these Tour de France's, and it was just crazy, you know? And he seemed like a great inspiration.
Is France near France?
Yeah, it's near France.
See, now you know what it feels like to get one of those jokes. This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda.
Your host?
I'm a therapist and I'm a professor, and only 1% of the jokes on this podcast, the bad ones, are by me. Who are you, Humberto?
My name is Liza Minnelli, and I'm actually a lawn scare professional.
All right, so this episode is for patron Maite, who has requested this episode for, I believe, years. Honestly.
We met patron Maite here in Seattle at least once.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So for those who don't know, I'm going to briefly sum up Lance Armstrong's life, and then we'll get into more of the details. Yeah. So he's by far the most, wouldn't you say, the most famous American cyclist ever?
Yeah, certainly.
I mean, I can't think of another American.
I'm sure if you're into the sport,
well, totally.
You would, but in general, like, he's the guy.
In fact, I can't name any other cyclist.
I could name at least 5 others, but I'm not going to.
Really? I didn't know you were in it. Every once in a while.
I'm kidding. I'm bluffing.
You can't name another cyclist.
You would have said, like, name one, and I'm like, I don't want to right now.
I see.
You know,
I should have played along.
Yeah, you just believed me. You should never believe me.
Right. So Lance Armstrong is, whatever he did, not only in cycling, but also just marketing his brand, so to speak, made him, and his story of getting cancer and recovering. And people loved him. I think that's one thing that we might forget, given his bad press in the last few years. People loved him. Do you remember that time?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, it was like, first of all, anyone loves a story of a successful athlete. You know, in general, people love successful athletes. But then there was this additional thing of like, and then he got cancer, and then he beat the cancer, and he came back and won again. It's like, how could you,
Well, there was that, which obviously was a massive, well, we'll get into it.
He was beloved.
He was beloved, yeah. I think for a lot of reasons, which we'll get into. He was in movie cameos. Do you know what movies he cameoed in?
I do remember seeing him, but now I don't remember what.
He was in Dodgeball in 2004.
Yeah, right.
He was, and some others, but he was also, there was also a movie made about him called The Program, a biopic, which we'll get into in a second. And he was also in Tour de Pharmacy in 2017.
That sounds like a winner.
Appearing as himself, a parody of blah, blah, blah. But anyway.
Wait. And the whole thing was, like, he was the main actor?
No.
Oh, okay.
He was a cameo of himself.
Oh, wait a minute. Is that what I think it is about? Like Tour de Pharmacy, like talking about all the drugs in the Tour de France?
Yeah.
In the France?
Well, I don't know if it was that. Anyway, essentially in cycling, maybe is the...
By the way, side note, we've talked about this before. Remember how in the 80s, they used blue screens in movies, like in Superman and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Which, by the way, that would have been bad because you had a blue suit too. But right now I have a blue screen. And then when green screens came out, people were like, oh yeah, it's a green screen. And I had this debate one time when I was like, well, like a blue screen. And they're like, don't you mean a green screen? And I'm like, well, sure, but there used to be blue screens. And they wouldn't believe me. Like, absolutely they were blue screens. And I remember watching the TV special where they were showing how they did the flying scenes in Superman, and they talked about the blue screens.
I see.
But, like, no one believed me.
So for those who are just listening to this in their ear holes, we are actually recording video of this episode for YouTube.
Right. So then when I did my prop here with the blue screen.
Yeah, I don't recommend...
It flies over their heads.
99% of people are probably just in their ear holes. In fact... Some people, even on YouTube, might only be listening to this because they don't want to watch our faces.
So no one can see what I'm doing right now.
So he started Live Strong, which is the charity for cancer awareness and research. And did you have the bracelet?
I don't think so. But I've been to that website many times throughout the years because they have a lot of useful nutritional information and things like that, health information.
He raised a lot of money for cancer research and awareness. How much money do you think he raised?
Wow. $50 million.
10 times that, 500 million.
Jeepers.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. So
$500 million.
to put this in, well, I can't really put it in perspective, with numbers, but a lot of celebrities and sports figures will have a charity that they are a part of, or even run themselves, or they found.
Yeah.
And yeah, they can raise a lot of money, but $500 billion is unheard of for any charity. There's so many charities out there, and so
I did not know that.
That reflects how
That's incredible.
Not only how much everyone loved him, but how adept that he or his team are at marketing what they're doing. Because a lot of there's probably hundreds of celebrities who have cancer-related charities,
right?
And you don't hear about them. You don't see their bracelets everywhere the way you did with Livestrong.
But a lot of those, they're actually trying to give people cancer, so those don't have the same pull. Let's just say.
But as maybe some people don't know, he was accused of using performance-enhancing drugs. Do you know when the accusations started with him?
Wasn't it like 2008?
It was 10 years earlier than that.
Really?
Yeah, they were. That was surprising to me. Was the accusation started in the late 90s?
No way.
Pretty much at the beginning of his career. Yeah.
So some people kind of knew or were in on the accusations, and just the general public didn't hear about it till 10 years later.
I don't know when the general public would have heard about it necessarily, but...
Well, I mean, like me, I'm a general public kind of person. I don't follow cyclism. Clearly, I don't follow cyclism. But I remember hearing about it around that time, 2008 or 2000,
Cyclism is when you are essentially like prejudice against another person's brand of bicycle.
Yes.
Like, oh, you have a Schwinn.
Oh, specialist? Oh, please.
Yeah. We just named the two bikes that we know. We don't know any others. Well, Mongoose, I remember as a kid.
Mongoose. I had a Mongoose. Yeah. Mongoose was badass.
Diamondback. I'm just naming like
REI. Isn't that a brand?
Yeah, he denied it the whole time adamantly. He was in hundreds of press situations denying it.
And by the way, for me, like I have this weird thing about performance enhancing drugs. Like first of all, I understand the problem, right? Like if a certain percentage of athletes are just trying to compete as non-enhanced human beings, and then some other percentage goes ahead and enhances themselves, and they happen to win, I understand the problem. It's I get it. At the same time, what really I think upset me and probably a lot of people is how angry he was denying it, and how he went after the accusers and all these things.
Right. We'll get into that too as well. So, and it should be pointed out that from my observation, most people believed him that he was innocent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And wanted to. I mean, I wanted to believe. I'm like, come on, man.
Yeah.
No one would deny. Like, no one would write a book called "If I Did It," if they did it.
Yeah. 2012, he was found guilty of using performance-enhancing drugs in his career.
And that was 12. Okay.
2012. And he was stripped of all of his titles.
Yeah, right.
And then a year later, 2013, he finally admitted it on what show?
The dude with the mustache, kind of balding.
Nope, Oprah.
Oprah?
Oh, yeah. It's a very famous Lance Armstrong.
Is that the one where he says he's super happy and jumps up on the couch? And
Exactly.
Okay.
Then everyone hated him.
Yeah.
We went from
persona non grata,
loving him to hating him. And people are diagnosing him with, that he's a narcissistic personality disorder, a psychopath, which we will get into. We will diagnose from afar with a ton of caveats.
By the way, I will say, like, even after that happened, I don't ever remember feeling like, oh, I hate this guy. I actually thought it was just kind of tragic. It was a tragic story because I'm like, man, like, this is someone everyone looked up to. And I think we all really believed his denials because, like, And then, but you were, but most importantly, you were lying every single time. Like,
yeah, I think another, well, we'll get into it. So
it was heartbreaking.
He was born in 1971, which makes him about the same age as me, by the way. In Plano, Texas, just outside Dallas, raised by his mother. I think his biological father wasn't around at all.
Not at all.
Right. So right there we have a trauma of abandonment and neglect that would affect both his mom and maybe compromise her parenting and him.
Right.
Age 2, 1973, his parents divorced. So, I don't know.
So they weren't together and then they divorced. And
I think so.
something like that.
Something not great. 1974, mother married again when he was around 3. And this is where the Armstrong name comes from.
That's his stepdad's?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. And he adopted Lance, so then he took on the name Armstrong.
It's a good last name.
They divorced soon after that. So it was just Lance and his mom. Again.
Oh. That's double dip.
And his mom worked long hours as a secretary, so she wasn't really around very much for him. So this is total speculation.
Oh, man.
I have no idea. Maybe there's publications out there that refute this or support it. I don't know. Total speculation is that in all likelihood, he grew up with a fair amount of neglect and abandonment and general mistreatment. I don't know about any abuse, but having a father that's not there, that's mistreatment. Divorce always causes issues. A stressed out mom who's working all the time, that's going to put a crimp on your personality, so to speak.
I mean, divorce is pretty jarring at any age, but like when you're so young.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not diverse it's ever been, but it's like bad.
Yeah. Attachment insecurity develops because you start to learn experientially that you can't really depend on other people. You start to question whether or not you're a lovable person or not. And you have a choice about coping. You can either say, well, is it them or is it me?
Right.
And he seemingly chose it's them, meaning that he had to land on an idea that he's all good and other people are all bad.
Interesting.
And with a fair amount of anger and grief and thoughts of revenge, and meaning that he had a pretty strong drive. And I think his mom had an attitude like this too. He talks about how his mom was a real fighter, and I think that they both kind of developed this us against the world thing, and we're going to show them kind of a thing.
Right.
And also this notion again, because so when you're treated well enough, you can develop a model of the world where I'm good and other people are good.
Right.
I have some flaws and other people have some flaws, but in general, I'm good and other people are good.
It balances out.
Right. You have a realistic idea of self and others. When you have some incursion on your attachment, you have to develop these coping mechanisms. And you kind of have to become extreme, because if I can't depend on other people, if my mom's at work all the time and my fathers leave me and I'm alone and abandoned, then I can't really depend on other people. I have to depend on myself.
Yeah.
And in order for me to feel secure in the world, I have to believe that I am very, very good, that I'm smart, I'm capable, I don't need other people.
Yeah.
This is attachment avoidant, insecurity. And so,
which I can relate to, as we've talked about before. Like, obviously I got saved from not being too extreme in these regards, because I had a very, very loving set of family members in Colombia that were aunts, grandmas, uncles, cousins, and the community effect, I think, gave me back some of the pieces that were missing, that were really deep wounds, right? But I still ended up developing a situation where, and I it's still to this day, like, it's not easy for me to ask for help, for example.
Right.
And I don't really think it's everyone is evil or anything, but I do often feel it's me versus the world, in like if I don't do it, I'm screwed, like those kind of things.
And some level of narcissism where you think you're not necessarily superior to other people, but
no, just generally better.
And
no, definitely, and yeah, absolutely. Some level of emotional detachment as a defense mechanism.
Right.
And yeah.
Exactly. So that's what I was going to bring up is in order to cope as well, one has to cut yourself off from your feelings and just generally be unaware of it, not only on a conscious level, but on a unconscious level. Yeah. Because when you're sad and lonely, it doesn't do any good to notice those feelings because you're not going to be able to, you don't really trust the world to help you with that. Yeah. So I don't know, total speculation, but there's some signs that we'll get into later where I think he had some of those coping mechanisms to deal with the difficulties he went through as a young person.
I have a quick question for you.
Yeah.
Top performing athletes or people like Elon Musk, et cetera, like any one of these things requires like an inordinate amount of time and commitment and self-motivation and all these kinds of things. I wonder if there's correlation or if there's some sort of studies that show, common personality or attachment issues when someone goes extreme in any one of those directions, or if it's really more random than that.
Meaning people who achieve a lot?
Yeah, like really ultra high achievers.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I obviously don't know because I would have to assess everyone. And I don't know if anyone's actually done research like that. It'd be a hard one to manage. Yeah. But I suspect, that a lot of the high achievers that we observe absolutely had some level. So I would guess that, I think Donald Trump actually went through something quite severe because he seems to have quite a coping mechanism to deal with his insecurities. Yeah. So I think that, but it can't be so severe that you become dysfunctional and unable to sustain even any relationships. Yeah. So I think it has to be within a certain range. Having said that, I'm sure there's plenty of securely attached individuals who achieved a lot. Right. In fact, securely...
it seems like Bill Gates, for example, seems somewhat...
Okay, I'll take your word for it.
Well, I just, from like having seen, like he came from a family that seems stable. He built a company and then like built like sort of charity works and things. And like you've never seen, other than the infamous testimony in the 90s, like you've never seen a lot of acting out behaviors from him or really erratic things or, I don't know. It seems like he's maybe a counterexample, but who knows?
Yeah, hard to know. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that he developed this early drive to compete and this early drive to believe that he deserved things, that he actually could achieve greatness. And he needed to achieve greatness is the thing, because in order to uphold the coping mechanism of I can depend on me and I'm good, you have to constantly run for the next goal and achieve it. Because if you slow down and just say, hey, I'm a good enough person, I've achieved enough already, I don't necessarily need to win this race, or say he's in the 6th grade. If you slow down, then what crops up is these notions of lack of self, notions of insecurity, notions of loneliness, and depending on the severity, it'll be quite distressing, and you got to get back on that treadmill, so to speak.
Interesting.
Age 13, 1984, he won the Iron Kids Triathlon.
Oh, man.
So
he was doing it from the start.
Right. So triathlon, age 13, and won.
Yeah.
87, age 16, turned into a professional triathlete. So originally he was a triathlete. Yeah.
Interesting.
1992, age 21, he was in the Olympic Games in Barcelona.
What?
Yeah. For I don't know, cycling, I think.
Not shot put? Shot caller baller?
So now when you have that attachment insecurity and you have that coping style, you're looking for things as a young person to help distract you from the insecurity. And you're also looking for something that will satisfy that need to feel like you matter in the world.
Like doing a podcast and talking.
Exactly. For example. And he found, partly because he probably just randomly landed on it, and also partly because he is genetically the sort of person who actually can train well and do all those things well, and maybe was inspired by some, or he was just as likely to pursue music or podcasting or politics or being the smartest person in the room. There's a lot of different pursuits that people will land on. For whatever reason, early in his life, clearly he landed on this sort of activity and found success. I mean, imagine winning these things when you're 13.
Right.
These are big
So
deals.
there's the biological factor where kids try stuff, and stuff that they do better at, they tend to feel more rewarded at, so they start doing more of that.
Right.
Yeah.
And a person perhaps with the same biology but with not insecure attachment might have found that, oh, wow, I'm really good at this thing.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to break my back to win every time.
Yeah.
I'll try.
I don't have to win every meet.
I'm going to try. But I'm going to hang out with my friends, and there's going to be a balance to my life.
Yeah.
I don't think he's that sort of person back then. I don't think he again needed to get on that treadmill of constant achievement to distract him and make him feel worthy in the world of love. And also just imagine the amount of attention and love you got when you won these kinds of things. And so I think it was a self-fulfilling prophecy that also, or a vicious cycle in that, so if you will, in that he also probably had to deny relationships. He probably had to not really pay attention to socializing or having fun, and thus not being able to heal from those attachment wounds, which makes him feel more lonely, which means he needs to get into the sports even more.
And I have to imagine...
Again, total speculation.
Right. I have to imagine that, the younger you are when you start dramatically succeeding at things, the harder it may be for you to put that in perspective as you're growing up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and again, the attachment insecurity and those around you who put it in perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
So
like maybe if you're a kid in Hollywood and you have really good parents and they really guard you well, they put you still in school, and then they limit how much actual work you're doing, all these kinds of things, maybe you can end out walking out of that not too scathed. But
Hollywood meaning they were an actor?
Yeah, but like so many kid actors, they don't walk away. They walk away horribly scarred,
right?
Because they had all this success, and this reality becomes like, oh, okay, this is the world. The world is this thing that loves me, and I'm like flawless, but I'm not. But I hate myself. But what?
It makes me think of, and again, I have no idea, the kid who played Joffrey Baratheon.
Oh, yeah.
Who was a huge star at one point.
Right.
And then decided he didn't want to act anymore.
Man, yeah.
He
probably got so much hatred.
Well, I also think he just thought, I don't know, it's just not for me.
Yeah, it's not for me.
And he is really interested in going to college and having a career of some kind of specialist professional. I can't remember what he was. I think science, I think.
Oh, wow.
And he seems like a delightful fella. And so I don't know, but you could imagine that's a sign of someone, again, who has flexibility and isn't going to ruin their life over, trying to pursue the accolades of society. So 1995, he goes pro. As the story goes, he kept getting beat by other cyclists who were using performance-enhancing drugs and procedures. So he went to the physician that everyone else was going to and got his performance-enhancing drugs.
And this is the thing I was going to bring up at some point. The part that's unfortunate in this whole conversation is that we all, I think a lot of us might pretend like, oh, so he was using drugs? Oh, no wonder he won all the thing is, so many of them were using drugs. He was still like the top athlete or one of the top athletes. Now, so if you could wave a magic wand and everyone else stopped using drugs and he stopped using drugs, would he still win all the championships? We're not sure. But there's no way he wasn't going to win a lot of those championships anyways, even with or without the drugs, if everyone else wasn't taking the drugs.
Well, we'll get into that.
I guess
that's a good discussion overall.
What I'm trying to say is that it's not like and maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm wrong about the science here, but it's not like when you take these drugs, for some people it boosts them 400%,
Right.
and for some other people 100%.
No. If you and I took those performance-enhancing drugs and procedures, we would still be dead last.
Yeah, exactly.
In that race.
But we'd be first in podcast. Have we even talked about it?
I think caffeine is a performance-enhancing drug.
Well, what if we took steroids and podcasted? That's a great point, Kirk. Throw the table.
On that note, let's take a break, and when we get back, let's discuss more about this. What do you say?
Toxic. Let's do it.
All right, we're back from the break. So, Humberto, if Lance Armstrong, during his denial days, were to ask people to become patrons of the podcast, what would he say?
You know me well. I trained so hard.
He would sing?
I thought he's not a singer, is he? Okay.
So
he
somehow
does
in
sing.
all that, you interpret, this is a song.
This is a song, of course. And then
Did I say sing a song? Maybe
I don't know, but he sings in this reality, so just let it be. Let it be. Anyways, he says, I never drink or do any enhancing drugs. But if you give, I'll win the Tour de France. Very hard for you.
So this is like the musical version.
Well, you know what happens is I don't actually remember what he talks like. So I can't do like some sort of impersonation.
When he denied in the news, he was very definitive.
Okay.
He's like,
listen, I got one thing to say. And for all you, and I've heard a lot of people say, I have never, ever asked anyone to donate to this podcast, or will I ever do it again? Period. And that's my final answer.
That's pretty good. That was
There we
pretty
go.
much right.
But I like the fact that he sang.
All right. So
By the way, I'd like to apologize for my outburst before the break because there's the roids. Just, okay.
So he started quote unquote doping, which just always grates my ears whenever anyone uses dope like as a word for heroin or pot. Or,
Oh, really?
Or it just doping. It just sounds so silly to me.
What does it come from? From dopamine or from?
No, I don't.
From it's like dope. It's cool.
Well, I don't know where the origins, but dope, from the little bit of awareness I have of this world, is that dope is a word for drug. You know,
Yeah.
It's like a code word. Like the pot was originally a code word, and so maybe I don't know. Anyway,
Interesting.
so Lance would later admit that to using lots of different so dope is a general term for lots of different things, for using growth hormones, cortisone, EPO, steroids, testosterone.
Oh my God.
And also quote unquote blood doping.
So everything, all of the above.
Yeah. So do you
Holy
know what?
crap.
Do you know what blood? But mainly he was doing blood doping and steroids. Which let's get into some. So do you know what blood doping is?
Isn't that basically kind of like the shortcut to high altitude training, where like you can carry more oxygen?
Yeah. But do you know like how they do it?
No, more blood cells. More. What do they do?
Yeah, it's more red blood cells.
Oh, they literally inject you with more blood cells.
Right. So from my understanding, so it's EPO drug increases that, and also you do blood transfusions. You actually, I think what they do, if I'm not mistaken, is you actually extract your own blood, and there's some procedure in a machine that can extract the red blood cells from it.
Right.
And then
so you don't add more fluid.
Right.
That'd be kind of...
you do actual red blood cells.
What
that means you can carry oxygen to the muscles.
Yeah. That's incredible.
And can you imagine where the first usage was for that?
What kind of sport or what?
Whatever you think.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Astronauts.
Close, but before
Everest.
that. Before that.
Not Everest. Even before that. Treating wounded soldiers.
Good. Military. They use this for high altitude pilots.
Oh, okay.
So
for Air Force. Got it.
So yeah, military, they used it to help pilots at high altitudes, and other such uses in the military in 1947. So a long time ago.
That is a long time ago. And I wonder if, because when you're in a plane, a commercial plane, it's pressurized, but I suppose maybe in the small little jet fighters, they can't quite pressurize as much.
Well,
so they might be...
What they did was they would have...
the gas masks.
Yeah, they have respirators. And so I don't know the details on that. But
Interesting.
So what are the adverse effects of this process, do you think?
Of blood doping specifically?
Yeah.
Well, let me think. For one thing, so you are introducing more cells, more blood cells, but your blood pressure must rise a bit. I would think so. That can give you potentially heart problems down the line. And then maybe when you're not blood doping, your body tries to compensate. Okay, well, we got enough blood cells, so let's not produce as many. Stuff like that.
I don't know about that second one, but the first one is true. It actually makes your blood so thick that it can clog you. Yeah, it can clog your arteries. It increases the chance of heart attack, stroke, etc. Also, liver failure, pituitary problems, and can increase cholesterol levels.
Eeks.
He also took steroids. So, do you know, which is a hormones? Yeah. Do you know the psychological effects of taking steroids? You mentioned one earlier.
I've just what I've heard. Mostly, as I understand it, it might make you more aggressive, more irritable, shorter patience, that kind of thing.
It actually can. Aggression, roid rage is an actual observed thing. Yeah. It can make you paranoid and delusional. It can cause one to be jealous. It can impair your judgment. It can induce mania. Pretty rare, though, is the thing. A lot of people are using steroids, and most people aren't running around trying to kill everyone. It can cause health problems like kidney failure and liver damage and heart problems, increased risk of stroke and heart attack, similar to blood doping. In men, it can shrink your testicles because...
Mine specifically? If you take steroids, it can shrink my testicles?
Yep.
Jeez.
You can develop breasts, and it can increase your risk of prostate cancer. In women, it can cause growth of facial hair, decreased breast size, male pattern baldness, enlarged clitoris, and a deepened voice. And in teens, it can stunt your growth.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's interesting. In men, it basically can take away some of your male, biological markers, so to speak.
Yeah.
And in women, it can add male biological markers. So
it's possible that he accelerated the possibility of him getting prostate cancer as a result of his...
It was testicular cancer. But yeah, maybe.
So I personally, what I like to do is I inject gorilla muscle tissue into my nuts.
So he later said that everyone was doing it. Once he admitted to doing it, he said basically a lot of people were doing it, if not all the main competitors. He said, as we were talking about earlier, it was the only way to compete. Do you believe that to be true?
Yeah. The things that I've heard about that sport and a few others is that if you don't do it, you're just not going to be... depending on what you mean by compete, if you want to be part of the sport and show up, great. If you want to try to win and the top people are also doping, yeah. Right. Sadly, you got to kind of do it.
Right. So if Lance Armstrong wasn't using performance-enhancing drugs and he entered a race with, say, a smaller race in Colorado or something, and the competition was lower, then he could win because he is a excellent cyclist, excellent shape, good form, trains a lot, all that kind of stuff. He's a good cyclist.
Right.
But when you get to the upper levels, you're going to do everything you can, and you're going to do thousands of things.
Yeah.
And everything you do increases your speed just a little bit more. Yeah. If you train, 5 hours a day instead of 4.5.
Yeah.
If you make sure your BMI is X instead of X plus 1.
Right.
If you don't drink alcohol, if you don't smoke cigarettes, if you don't if you make sure you sleep well every night, every little thing you do.
Especially at those world record levels, like the Olympics, the whole joke, Seinfeld, whatever. It literally is micro things.
Yeah. They will shave their legs,
right,
and there's different helmets, and they've done tests where this helmet will shave 5 seconds off of your time. This particular type of material that you wear, this seat is half a gram lighter, and therefore we'll subtract half a minute off of a 4-hour race.
Right.
And so, and it's all, it's all in
and now
science.
All that is legal.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I absolutely believe this. I played very competitive sports growing up. I know I've said this before on the podcast, if you ask people who grew up with me and they didn't know me very well, depending on the situation, many of them would think of me just as a jock. Mm-hmm. That was one of my sort of outward identities. I was captain of the football team. I was captain of my wrestling team. I was captain of my soccer team when I was a kid. So I not only competed, but I was considered a leader and considered a high competitor. I went to the University of Washington training camp or recruitment camp. Once I was there, I realized there's no way I'm going to make the team. But I was encouraged to walk on and become a walk-on, and just didn't. So I was a major competitor,
right,
and I played a position that required a lot of strength. I played fullback, and I also played middle linebacker. Middle linebacker in particular, it requires a fair amount of strength and endurance, and a lot of people around me were taking steroids.
Oh, in high school?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
So much. And I never took it. In fact, my friends never even offered it to me because they knew I wouldn't take it.
Yeah.
Which I find to be so interesting that they didn't even bring it up.
They didn't even try.
Yeah. But all my friends took it at least part of the time, because we would be working out. And so part of your conditioning is working out in the weight room,
sure,
3 or 4 hours a day during the off season in particular. And you would just see the guy next to you increasing his body mass, his muscle mass,
right,
increasing the big thing
numbers
back in the day was how much you could bench press.
Right.
And everyone would announce, like, I'm up to 210. Ooh, do it. You're at your record, 220. You can do it. And
I did 225. That was my best in high school.
Right. So imagine if you could take a drug. If someone next to you said, if you take this drug in a week, you'll be doing 250.
Yeah.
Just imagine how tempting that would be.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if I mentioned this, but the downside to using blood doping and steroids are actually pretty low. The chance of you having a problem is actually pretty low. If you do it according to physician orders, especially, and you monitor things, it's actually pretty safe. It definitely has its potential downside, but it's not like 1 out of 10 high school kids using steroids has some kind of massive noticeable issue, So it's like, hey, so not only that, but when you are in the culture of competitive sports, it is a mentality and a culture and a world that is completely separate and different and distinct from the rest of the world.
Yeah.
There are competitive women's softball players who take steroids. There are competitive curlers who probably don't take steroids. But there's a world of competition where that's all that matters in life.
Yeah.
That is all that matters, that upcoming thing. There are people I know who are into weightlifting competitions, and that's every minute of every day is building up towards that next competition and the training. And again, you're doing everything. You're just to get into some of the things, I wrote some notes down in terms of, before I get into that, you get not only is it a world that is culturally kind of homogenous, where everyone thinks a certain way. In my world of the football world that I lived in, no one said things like, well, it's just a game. No one said that.
Right.
No one said, well, maybe you won't get a scholarship in college. Who knows? Or very few people said it. Let's just put it that way.
We have to win on Friday.
Right. So there was a very, it becomes this group think that is very much geared towards winning and being the best player and all that kind of stuff. But you also get tons of attention from everybody. I mean, the amount of attention I got from being a sporto was enormous.
Right.
I mean, yeah, like I said, for some people, that's all they know of me because of how much attention I got for being captain of the football team,
It's funny, I didn't know you and I had so much in common. Because, you're saying people that didn't know you very well consider you kind of a jock.
Yeah.
And people who didn't know me very well consider me kind of a joke.
That really paid off, my friend. Newspaper articles, pictures in the yearbook, adults kissing your ass. I can't tell you how many times I would walk. I was like 16 years old, 15 years old, 17. I'd walk off the field and the adoration that I got from adults, because people in the community and the parents and my fellow students. I mean, I can remember beat by beat so when I was a sophomore, no sophomores were on the varsity team. It was all juniors and seniors. And they had me suit up for the game. And that was an honor. I was on special teams. I was on kickoff and kickoff return, I think. And that was sort of like where they put like all the clean shirts, we called them, because they didn't get dirty. But I was just so happy. I was a star just to be like one of the 2 or 3 sophomores who just suited up for the varsity games. And the sophomores who sat in the stands, there were a lot. So a little thing about high school football in our area back then was that the seniors were out drinking and smoking, so they didn't go to the games.
So it's the juniors and sophomores kind of.
And the juniors are sort of edging in that direction. The sophomores, most of them didn't have cars or licenses, so there's only one thing you could really do on a Friday night, and that was to go watch the football game. And you just had to sit in the stands. And so half of the stands, or not half, but a lot of the stands were the sophomores. And
idolizing the seniors that are playing.
And knowing me.
Right, exactly.
It's like, there's Kirk Honda. And because, that'd be one of the first things you sort of look at. And then a long string of events happened, concussions, injuries, and suddenly I'm in the game.
Wow.
And the very first play, I batted a pass right in front of our bench.
Baseball?
Yeah. Right in front of our bench and in front of our stands. And the eruption of cheering, and the announcer, actually, I grew up the guy who announced all the games over the loudspeaker knew me extremely well. I grew up right next to him. So as soon as he saw me doing something, he was actually really happy. And so he announces it, and Kirk Honda with the deflected pass, and it's just a stupid little moment in sports. But I can remember beat by beat because of I was 15 at the time, and just that super amount of fame. And then I walk off the field at the end of the game. Everyone, especially my fellow sophomores, were just going crazy over me, because football is so important in America, particularly in certain communities like the one I was in. And so imagine if someone right next to me were watching that whole thing happen, or imagine for me if I started to kind of fall behind. And I loved that attention and needed it a lot, and grew up with insecure attachment and didn't have the loving, secure, safe parents that I did. Imagine that I'd be like, hey, I got to keep this boat afloat. And if it takes taking a steroid that I see my friends taking, then hey, let's do it.
So, question: what did the parents call you? Honda or Kirk Honda?
Honda. Everyone called me Honda.
You'd come off the field and like some parent is like, Honda,
Yeah.
Looking good out there, son.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then they run into you at the grocery store. Hey, what a game on Friday.
Absolutely.
We're counting on you for this season, blah, blah, blah.
Absolutely.
That's hilarious. So when I first moved up here when I was 15, one of my mom's best friend families, the husband his name was George. And he was a big dude, a little on the heavy side because of his age, but he was clear he was a big dude. He probably played football. I'm pretty sure he played football. And he loved football, he loved all the games and everything. And we would go over to their house around Christmas time and stuff. And at first he would just love trying to talk to me about football and sports and the Lakes. Lakes was my high school. The Lakes, man, they did great. Were you at the, and I'd pretend I'm yeah. So, well, what do you think about the UW, the Huskies chances this? And, eventually I was like, yeah, I don't really know. But he always was trying to engage me in that.
Right. It's a way for a community to have a common language.
Right.
Like talking about Seinfeld back in the day.
Yeah.
Or what's in the news. It's a community builder. And to be the star and the hopes of a community, because when my team beat Mercer Island, which was one of our rivals, and who doesn't hate Mercer Island, our community felt good. We had self-esteem in the same way that when Seattle Seahawks win, right. A good portion of our city actually just has a bump in self-esteem, and
totally,
and vice versa. So yeah.
Absolutely. My last bit claim to fame when I was a senior in high school, I was in the swim team, and there were only 2 of us seniors in the team. And all the really good swimmers had graduated. Well, that's not fair. We had a really good freshman swimmer stuff. But the point is, we were up against our rival school, Clover Park. It was Lakes versus Clover Park. That was the last meet of the season. And we won. And the last little thing was the relay race. And I was in the relay. And I was the last swimmer because I was the crawl stroke. And we won. So I was like,
Right. So that's another performance-enhancing drug industry, because it comes down to 0.1 seconds, especially at the higher level. So yeah. Now, to go further into sports a little bit for context for those maybe that weren't in that world. Like I said, you already do hundreds or thousands of weird things to your body already. When I was a wrestler, we had to lose weight. Wrestlers it's always weight, unless you're a heavyweight, which is you're free to be whatever weight you want to. But for everyone else wrestling, you're in this constant battle, because the thing that so this is kind of like a performance enhancing practice in and of itself that is not good for your body. Losing weight, the things we did to lose weight were probably worse for our bodies than any kind of steroid would have done.
Yeah.
But essentially what happens is you're in a weight class, usually it's like a 5-pound range, 120 to 125. And if you weigh, say, 126, now you're in the 126 to 130 range. Those wrestlers are notably better than the wrestlers in your class, just because of their size, their muscles, their blah, blah, blah. So if you want to be competitive, you got to be in your weight class. But if you lose weight and go down to the 115 weight class, then you're going to dominate. So then everyone starts doing that. So everyone who normally would be 130 is in the 115 weight bracket, because if you don't do that, then you're going to, so say you're naturally 130, you're going to get the 160 guys who managed to lose weight by weigh-in date to 130, and they're going to be bigger, faster, stronger, just way more brutal than you are. So you got to lose that weight. And there was a moment where, I'll never forget this, when I was really trying to make my weight. I didn't care that much about wrestling, so I usually just picked a weight class that I could maintain. Some guys would try to maintain these insane weight classes. But anyway, there was this moment where I was trying to lose a lot of weight, and I wasn't going to lose fat cells by the next day, because you can't do that fast. So what do you have left?
Water.
Right. So we would wrap ourselves in saran wrap, and then put on sweats, and then exercise.
Yep.
and you were just trying to sweat out just gallons of water, and you lost weight. That's not healthy.
Nope.
But and also eating cucumbers and carrots, and it was totally sanctioned and expected. Like, my parents didn't bat an eye at that. My dad probably said, "Yeah, that's what you got to do."
That's what you do.
Yeah.
So I'm very familiar with that because I'm a huge UFC fan, like mixed martial arts fan.
Which is another steroidville.
Right. And the weight cutting is egregious. There are these problems. I don't know if it's worse than boxing, but boxing's been around for a long time. So like they have a lot of subcategories and it's kind of been figured out, let's say. But in mixed martial arts, sometimes the gaps between the categories, there's not enough subcategories. And so the people have to make huge leaps down. And you get these problems where people nearly die. People have to cancel matches because they go into like seizures. They have other problems. It's horrible.
Right.
There's a whole documentary about it. Like, and honestly,
and that's not steroids. That's just losing weight.
That's right. And as a fan, I hate that shit because, I'm looking forward to a fight. And I don't want to see this gaunt, like 180-pound normal person at 155, right? The worst, Conor McGregor, one of the most famous ones. He used to fight at 145. At 145, he looks like a skeleton. It's not healthy, man.
Well, it's certainly interesting, shall we say.
Yeah.
Perhaps for some of them it could be healthy, and obviously for some it wouldn't be healthy. But that's totally sanctioned.
Yeah.
That self-abuse, that race to the bottom, shall we say, that is totally fine. In fact, it's expected. It's totally sanctioned. They weigh in. That's one of the ceremonial things that everyone does before those fights. So now getting to football, it gets way worse because of the injuries that I experienced. I had many concussions. I have a broken back that is still broken.
Where was it? How high up?
Like just above my tailbone.
Jeez.
So it's to the point where if you look at a X-ray of my back, it's all fucked up. There's nothing you can do, essentially. I have a slip disc in my jaw that every once in a while it pops out. I had several pinched nerves. We just called them stingers or pinched nerves, and some of them would last for months. I had massive surgery on my hand twice. Others had it worse.
Because of broken hand?
No, I actually ripped it so hard that the tendon or the tendon that pulls this last knuckle, my guitar hand, by the way, it pulled off the bone, right? So I couldn't move my finger anymore.
I remember because when we started playing, you were only using 2 or 3 fingers, right?
I can kind of use it, but you run all the time, you work out every day. Before the season starts, we had 3 practices a day. We call them 3-a-days.
3? Like what?
Three football practices a day.
Morning, afternoon, and middle of the day?
Basically, we were practicing from like 7 until 7, And so just think about that. Practicing conditioning all day long, every day. And, so you're already, massive amounts of pain. When I played football, I was in so much pain on an ongoing basis, just from either conditioning, but also just from bruising, the amount of pounding your body goes through. Even when you hit someone, that's the one thing that people don't necessarily realize when you watch football is, well, they have pads on. Well, there's a human being underneath that pad. It's not, the pad spreads the force out over the body, but it doesn't eliminate the force. I sometimes talk about this, maybe I did in the podcast, is a lot of times when they're congratulating football players, they'll hit you on the head.
Smack.
They hit you on the helmet. They'll be like, yeah, nice job. And I would tell people to knock that the fuck off because I'm like, my head's underneath that thing.
But the helmet protects you.
No, it doesn't.
It's like my pet peeve in movies, especially sci-fi movies, where they're traveling in these tiny little capsules and they crash land into the planet and the door opens and they walk out. You're like,
well, it's not just that. Iron Man.
Right.
When Iron Man just lands, he would be a jelly that would just ooze out the bottom of that suit. Right. It's
like your brain knows to stay still, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, everyone knows about baby shaking, right? Like you can kill a baby just by shaking it. Why? Because you're rattling its brain.
That's that famous kids song. Baby shake, dun, 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 baby shake, dun, 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 baby shake.
So pain pills, protein shakes, carb loading before the game. I wrote this down. Wake up, school, practice, homework, sleep. Wake up, school, practice, homework, sleep. Wake up, school. You know, that's your whole life.
Did you do a sport every season? Or did you take a season off? Meaning, what I mean is...
Up till a certain point. So as I got older, I started eliminating certain things because as I got older, part of me loved playing sports, but another part of me was just kind of over it. But when I was from, say, I don't know, 8 to 16 or 14 or something, that's all I did all year round.
I see. So I did swimming and cross country. Cross country was fall, swimming was winter, and then I took the spring off. And because I took the spring off and essentially the summer off, I took 6 months out of the year off. It really affected me come fall because everyone else was practicing the whole time.
Right.
But for some reason, well, not for some reason, I actually was a good swimmer. It's just, I didn't take it that seriously, right?
Yeah.
But by my junior year, I had gotten really good because of I took some weight training and things like this. So technically, yeah, I could have done 2-a-days throughout the summer. Don't take the spring off, do something, or just swim the whole, and I could have been way better. But I guess I just didn't care that much.
Right. Yeah, I was that way with basketball. I played basketball a lot, but I never cared. Plus, I wasn't very good. And I never practiced. I just showed up and I didn't really care during practice.
Yeah.
It was mostly, what it was actually was, so football was my primary sport. And a lot of the other sports were essentially just off-season training for balance, for conditioning.
I see.
Wrestling in particular, you really get to know the body and leverage and how to use your body for leverage because when you're playing football, and particularly as a middle linebacker, and you're trying to shuffle off, you're trying to shed blockers, you're trying to make tackles, it has something to do with your body mass and your muscles and your strength, but it has much more to do with your ability to use what you have and to use eyes in any way. So you do all these things, and many of which we're not even getting into, and all you do is you just take this other little drug. In fact, you're probably also taking a lot of other drugs. So you're probably taking 5 drugs anyways, particularly as you get up to the upper echelons, right?
You're taking creatine, aspirin.
Yeah.
You're taking probably some protein shakes and amino boosters and blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
Right. And why not just take this other one?
Yeah.
That gives you yet another edge, another little boost. So,
and that's not counting the ones you're taking to focus on your studies. You're taking Adderall and Xanax to sleep or whatever.
Right. So research, rate of teen boys using steroids in the United States today.
Oh, come on, man.
So this is all teen boys. It's not just sportos.
Oh, okay. 10%.
6%.
Oh, well, good.
Well, that's more than 1 in 20.
I was expecting you to say something like 15, 20%.
But most kids don't play sports competitively.
That's fair.
So, that's a lot.
6% is a lot.
That's a lot of kids. That's millions upon millions of young boys. Teen girls, what percentage?
No way. Okay, fine. 4%.
5%.
Okay.
So basically the same as
Almost
boys.
the same, yeah.
So the stereotype of boys and steroids needs to end.
Yeah, it's just kids.
It's kids.
Eeks.
And girls today in particular, I find to be just as susceptible to the culture of heavy competition as boys are.
Ironically, I'm going to get in trouble for this one. As we, say, basically there's been a movement for sure to say that women are almost just as capable in sports as men are, and therefore I think the same kind of ultra competitiveness has seeped in that regard. So essentially, there's almost zero difference. If you need to be at the top of your game as a woman, it's the same thing as if you need to be at the top of the game as a man.
So other famous dopers, other famous performance enhancing, well, let's just stick with doping. Do you know any other famous blood doping people?
Blood doping? I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't know about this either, but I looked it up. Started in the 1960s by runners, and a famous example was the 1980 Summer Olympics in Moscow. And
Really?
a woman runner was transfused with 2 pints of blood, and she won the 5 and 10 kilometer track races.
Yikes.
And was caught and I think struck. So or stripped of her.
Stripped of her, yeah.
And it was actually not a problem. It wasn't frowned upon back then. It was just something that people did. It was only outlawed in 1986.
So why did they strip her?
Maybe they didn't. Okay. I don't know. Famous cases of performance-enhancing drugs. So, just as a blanket thing, do you know any famous cases besides Lance Armstrong?
Well, I know in the UFC stuff that I follow, there's been a few famous ones like Brock Lesnar and John Jones, but I don't know.
I have Chael Sonnen.
Yeah, Chael Sonnen was also found to be. Recently, there was a very lightweight competitor that was famously stripped of his title. He had won, but I don't know. I guess I can't remember right now all the football players. There's been several. Oh, I know. Not Mickey Mantle. What I'm talking about. The Sosa and McGuire.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So in the 90s and the 2000s, very famous baseball cases, Canseco, McGuire.
Yeah.
Also in running in the 90s, Ben Johnson of Canada.
Right.
Olympics.
I remember that.
He got the gold. The 2000s.
Versus Carl Johnson or something? No, Carl.
I forget his name,
Yeah.
And in 2000s in track and field, 5 gold medals to Marion Jones. This person was found to be using performance-enhancing drugs after the fact. Tyler Hamilton of cycling, who was actually on Lance Armstrong's team.
Oh, okay.
Tour de France rider Alexander Vinokurov and his teammate. Russian hockey player Alexei Cherepanov. German speed skater and 5 Olympic gold winner Claudia Pechstein. A-Rod Barry Bonds in baseball. 2006, there was allegations of hundreds of athletes from around the world, various sports. Also, actors. Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, these people, they weren't caught because they don't test in acting, but it's assumed by many people. Tyler Perry, 50 Cent, Mickey Rourke, Charlie Sheen.
Well, Schwarzenegger admitted that he used all that stuff because he said,
Well, of
that's
course
just what
he did.
you
That's
did.
the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's like, of course, he was gigantic, that guy. And it's like, you'd think he didn't. You think he was born with that, So a famous Hollywood trainer, again, just their statement, said that about 20% of actors use steroids today.
Just actors.
Which I absolutely believe.
That's interesting.
The amount of ripitude that some of these guys have.
I see.
They go from just being a regular guy to just being like Hugh Jackman was gigantic.
Well, as you said it, I was thinking Anthony Hopkins. And I'm like, really? And of course, there's all these action stars.
So Chris Hemsworth, Mark Wahlberg, Dwayne Johnson,
and it's not illegal. So for actors.
So he starts doping. Lance Armstrong, getting back to his story, and immediately he starts to win as the story goes. He raced in one significant competition. He was used to winning in the Olympics and other kinds of triathlon growing up. He gets this major competition and that goes up high in elevation and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And he just finds he's pretty far from the front of the pack. Wow. And then he asks around and they're like, well, all those guys ahead of you are doing this blood doping thing. And he's like, well, set me up. I'm already ruining my body with all sorts of other things. Let's get that on board too. He takes it, boom, he wins. Tour de Pont in 1996. He set several event records, including the largest margin of victory, 3 minutes and 15 seconds.
Wow.
Fastest average speed in time trial. Now, the question is this a placebo? You know?
Yeah, I mean, there's mental factors for sure, but those percentages, there's no way that's just gonna.
But we don't know. That's the whole thing. Like, there's no way to know because placebo is a powerful thing.
Sure.
And when you are cycling, a lot of it's mental, right? And so there could be an element to that. I doubt it.
I will
it's
say
a major factor, but you know.
Right. So I mean, I will say just my only experience in this regard, because I've never taken performance enhancing drugs other than the blue pill every night. I take a few, but other than that, I have experienced the whole altitude thing because I grew up at altitude in Bogota, and when I was younger, especially nowadays, it's not really a factor for me. But when I was younger, I went climbing with a group of friends to Mount Rainier, and
to be clear, you're at Bogota, you're 2 miles up, and as an adaptation over many years, perhaps even genetically through the family line, you have an increased amount of red blood cells in your bloodstream because there's less oxygen in the air, and there needs to be more ability to hold on to oxygen in your blood. And so you come to Seattle and Tacoma,
sea level,
which is very close to sea level, and then you go climbing Mount Rainier, which climbs to the level of Bogota.
Just a little over the level of Bogota. At base camp of Mount Rainier.
Not the top. But
And by the way, it's just like in Himalayas, it's definitely, there's a genetic factor, and then during your life, it accumulates, and then it goes down if you move down and all those.
So did you just like race up the mountain?
Well, that was the thing. We were climbing up, and at the time, this was in 96, I actually didn't, I knew that I guess I knew the altitude of Bogota. I had no idea it played a factor in any of this stuff. So we're going up, and I'm finding it normal. We're just hiking, and I actually started jogging. And I'm jogging up as it get higher and higher. And then everyone else is like, step. And they're like, what the hell is what is wrong with you? How are you jogging? I'm like, I don't know. And it was totally trippy. So from that perspective, I mean, that is one of the few times in my life where I felt like this weird advantage, like physical advantage that's like not just a little bit. It's not like when you are racing someone and you beat them by a little bit. I was like, oh my God, I'm a superhuman right now.
Yeah.
And so, that's not placebo.
Right. So when, to be actually more specific, when I was in high school, I did that climb as well. Again, top of my conditioning. I was extremely good shape at the time. And it was 1 step for every 3 breaths.
Yeah.
When you get up to the 9,000 mark, because you basically go from sea level to 9,000, in a day, and your body hasn't acclimated yet. And I would take and it's uphill, so it's kind of hard to do anyway.
Yeah.
But so you're kind of tired in general anyway. And I take a step, another step.
Right.
That's how severe it was, and for you to just be like waltzing up the mountain was that's something to say for sure.
It's bizarre especially if you don't know what the hell is going on. You're like,
right. So imagine if you take someone who is riding a bicycle and trying to stay energized and pushing hard, and you give them that superhuman ability that you had, maybe even more so.
Right.
Absolutely, that's gonna change things. So 1996, age 25. So at this point, he's on his rise. He's already winning. He's already taken the drugs. He's diagnosed with cancer, stage 3 testicular cancer.
I was that young.
Yeah, 25. Potentially fatal. People thought so it spread to his lungs, his abdomen, his lymph nodes, and his brain. And his physicians were fairly sure he wouldn't survive. So brain cancer, he has lesions. He has quote unquote extensive necrosis. He had to be surgically removed. So here's one question is, maybe that led to some kind of brain damage that resulted in some kind of personality change, hard to say, or the trauma of going through such a thing could cause personality change as well. He goes to lots of treatment, lots of chemotherapy. He's dropped by his team, the France team, and he recovers from the cancer. and he founds Livestrong Foundation, which $500 million, and he joins the U.S. Postal Service team, which I find to be hilarious. Yeah, that was his main team, was the U.S.
I had no idea.
Yeah, U.S. Postal Service team. So the U.S. Postal Service sponsors a team.
Because they use bikes a lot.
Yeah. So he joins the USA team.
Okay.
So then he has his major wins, seven Tour de France victories, again all while doping.
Sorry, side note. I mean, that makes sense. I bet you that team was around forever because, people used to deliver mail on bikes all the time. So they probably were like, hey, why don't we start a team with these people?
I don't know. I suspect the U.S. Postal team got into the game later, but I don't know.
I bet you I'm right. That's the story. I'm sticking with it.
I think he actually holds the record for the most Tour de France victories.
Wow.
I'm not actually quite sure. Olympics in 2000, he got the bronze and many, many others. I mean, I was looking at the list and it was all kind of Greek to me, all these different titles that I know I've heard of the Tour de France, but there's many other things that he won as well. France. He was named the greatest American cyclist, huge story in the United States. So this is where the myth or the story of Lance Armstrong, right? He's from Texas. He's not from Massachusetts.
Right.
Like, this is an American.
Right.
From Texas, from quote unquote real America.
And his last name is Armstrong.
Armstrong. He's white. He's an American. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad thing to have pride and,
sure.
I'm just saying it's a very, there's a lot of romance to this. He's a cancer survivor. They thought he was gonna die, and he was open about it. And so he was the poster child for so many things. American exceptionalism, because he goes to Europe, Tour de France, and beats them at their own game.
Not only did we liberate you people, but we beat you at everything.
Right. It's sort of like when the American hockey team in 1980 beat the Russian team.
Oh, right.
We're
a big deal.
American cyclists are considered not as good as the European ones, right? Yeah. And so there's this new movie coming out about Ferrari versus Ford.
Yeah, I've seen the preview.
It's a similar kind of thing, this notion somehow that Europeans are superior and this, upstart with the Ford Shelby. Anyway,
right.
So American exceptionalism, we're better than Europe. We're taken over. We're good at everything, including cycling. Also, this notion of just do it, right? This notion of never give up, even if you have cancer, you never give up. And cycling has a very clear appeal for that, because we all know that feeling of riding a bike or running where you just want to give up.
Yeah.
And it's like Lance Armstrong never gives up. These colors don't run. I keep sort of making fun of the conservatism.
Sure.
Most Lance Armstrong fans were probably liberal on some level, but anyway.
Well, and what you're saying though, as far as sports go, when you think what are some of the longer endurance kind of sports, cycling absolutely comes to mind because they're not riding an hour,
right?
Not 2 hours. No, they're riding days, weeks. It's this crazy amount of exercise.
Right. Also, cancer awareness was starting to become a thing in that a lot of people throughout history have been impacted by cancer, personally and also in their family. And it was, in America anyway, kind of a marginalized group of people because we don't like to talk about death, we don't like to talk about illness, we don't like to talk about weakness. And so when he came forward, I think there was this huge relief and gathering around the totem that was Lance Armstrong around cancer.
We can beat cancer. And
he did. And he's talking about cancer. He's the poster child for we can beat it. We can do it. Yeah. And so I think that made him just skyrocket in terms of his appeal to people. 1998, he would have been 27, married. He gets married. He saved his sperm from before his procedures, and he had 3 children. 1999, so this is when the doping allegations start. He lied and lied and lied. His teammates came forward. He would attack them in the press.
Wait, his teammates came forward and said, yes, he does dope?
Yeah, they came forward and said, we all do it.
We all do it.
In fact, many of them came forward and said he was the one who pressured everyone to do it.
Shit. And then he came and said, lies. These people are lying.
Right. Over and over. So this is going back to 1999.
Right.
Also, his teammates said that he was a bully. Have you heard of this stuff?
I don't know. I don't think so. I guess I did hear, now that I think about it, I heard the whole thing about how he would instigate others to do the doping, but I don't remember the bullying part. But I guess that's how you do it. Right.
So one of his teammates, I think that Tyler fella, I'm not quite sure, it tells a very believable story about how intimidating and bullying and aggressive he was. Like, for example, he would threaten people for outing him and other people about performance-enhancing drugs. He said to one person, according to this individual, that, quote unquote, I'm going to make your life a living hell.
Really?
So that's a particular kind of bullying, right? It's one thing to get upset and kind of big. It's another thing to say something like, because of what you did, I'm going to make your life a living hell. That's a particular brand of bullying.
Yeah.
Like, I've gotten angry before, and I've probably, quote unquote, bullied people in the moment because I was upset and kind of rattled and defensive or hurt and just, it's another, but I've never said, I'm going to make your life a living hell.
Imagine if you did that as a professor or as someone who takes care of people or something. Like, I am now got a vendetta. Like, my mission is now to make your life miserable.
Right. Well, imagine even just having that thought, right? Like,
yikes.
I hate you, and I'm going to scare you right now into submission, or I'm going to try.
I'm going to cut your heart out.
So he also, apparently, there's allegations that he said that he was going to put a bullet to the head over email. So
Wait.
Yeah.
Like
he threatened to murder people by shooting him in the head. Again, these are allegations, but given the amount of people who came forward and talked about this and the believability and the way they deliver the story, it seems believable.
So it's completely two different people in the public. And
right. He threatened wives of teammates, so not only just his teammates, but their wives. He was generally hard to get along with, which I kind of get because, again, if you're a major competitor, like I said, you're doing everything you can, and one of the things you might eliminate from your life is like fun and getting along with people because you have a sole focus.
I have that story that I think I've told in the podcast. I used to have this friend in college, and JC, we called him, Juan Carlos. He was Mexican. He went to Tulane University, and then he moved up here, and I think he was doing some postgraduate work or something at UW. And we became friends through my friend Carlos, the Argentinian. Great guy. We'd party, go out, drank a ton. Awesome. Okay. Years go by, and we lose touch. And I know he had gotten a lot into exercise. Him and I went running every now and then. And then one day we went running, and I couldn't keep up. I was like, whoa, man, you've gotten really good. Like, what the hell? It's like, yeah. Okay. Then I lost touch for a while. One day I was playing with my band, the original Missionary with Chanel on drums, and some club in Seattle. And afterwards I go, and in the audience, like not even the audience, just the club, he happened to come in. There he is. He's like, dude, I didn't know you had a band. I'm like, JC, what the hell? What are you doing out? It's like, just random. I'm here, blah, blah, blah. So we talked for a little bit. And I'm like, what have you been doing? Well, I got into Ironman. What? It's like, yeah, I'm doing an Ironman in such and such date and blah, blah. I'm like, dude, that's amazing. So then we keep talking. I'm like, all right, dude, when are we going to get together? We got to like catch up and stuff. It's like, oh, I don't think I can. I'm like, because you're a race. But what about after the race? He's like, no, you don't get it. Like, I'm always training. Okay, well, what about the weekend? No, the weekend I train the most.
Right.
Oh. And then I was like, what time do you wake up? 5. What time do you go to bed? Like, pretty soon it was clear we weren't going to get together.
Yeah.
Then a few years went by.
He didn't like you.
Yeah. A few years go by, and me and Eric, we're like out drinking a little bit, having fun. It's like 9 p.m. on a Friday or something. And we decide to call him up. Let's call JC. We call him up. Hello, dude, JC, what's going on? What's up, blah, blah. And he's super angry. He's like, do you realize, like, I have children and it's like 9 p.m. and like you're calling me and waking me up. I have to wake up super early. Do not call me at night. I was like, oh, okay, sorry, man. Bye. And that was it.
You never talked to him again?
I've never talked to him again.
Wow.
Like, he made a choice, it's just fine. Yeah. He chose this thing that he's super passionate about, but it changed his life completely. So to your point, fun was out the window.
Right. Not necessarily because fun is bad, but fun breeds people who bother you to do fun things, which take you away from training and,
And by the way, I'm not like, hey man, that's how people succeed in whatever they want to do, right? It's just, it shocked me because my personality tends to be like about friendships and loyalty about those friendships. So whenever something like that happens, I'm caught off guard.
Totally, yeah. 2003, would have been 32. He gets a divorce from his first wife. Do you know who he dated famously?
Yeah, Sheryl Crow.
Yeah.
All I want to do is take some dope.
They got engaged, then they broke up. He reportedly also dated Kate Hudson and Ashley Olsen.
What?
But I don't know.
From the Olsen twins?
He wrote 2 best-selling autobiographies around this time. Do you know what major politician he was very good friends with?
Clinton?
George W.
Oh.
Texas.
Oh, right.
He started talking about running for governor of Texas.
Oh, I kind of remember that.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That would have been successful, absolutely, had this not happened.
I don't know, just speculation, but again, more of this narcissism of, you'll see that with narcissistic people is they just tend to think they're good at everything. Like, you're both good at music and podcasting. I mean, come on.
Yeah, come on now.
Raises a bunch of money for cancer, as we talked about. He has a relationship with Anna Hansen, and they have 2 children, quote unquote, naturally.
What?
Not sure what that means.
Okay.
Meaning that I think maybe his sperm count came back. I'm not sure.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Anyway. 2012, he finally gave up fighting the authorities and because he was found, that he had used. Mm-hmm. But he has a quote here. I've been dealing with claims that I cheated and had an unfair advantage. Oh, no, sorry. So this is before he was caught.
Okay.
So
it's in 2012, but before he's finally, okay.
So he says, I have been dealing with claims that I cheated and had an unfair advantage in winning my 7 tours since 1999. This toll has taken, the toll this has taken on my family and my work for our foundation and on me leads me to where I am today. I'm finished with this nonsense. So I think he pulled out of cycling. I think because he actually suspected that the gig was up soon, and so he's trying to get ahead of it on some level.
I remember that conference. I do remember that conference.
Yeah.
And I still believe them.
Yeah. So of course. One, I think part of looking back, a lot of people are going to be like, man, people must have been naive, right? But the awareness of performance-enhancing drugs was so low, and the assumption culturally of just like, well, it must just be like 1 out of 1,000 people do it, maybe less. And this, because everyone keeps it quiet. They're not going to admit it. And when they get caught, they're going to say, oh, there must have been I must have had a poppy seed bagel or something.
Right.
And so that's the party line. Plus, all of our favorite athletes, or half, are using performance-enhancing drugs, is not something anyone wants to accept. I mean, imagine Michael Jordan. How many of his fans? Imagine LeBron James. All these people. You have to, think with Michael Jackson, when the amount of people who want to believe that he did not sexually abuse kids. Now, people still write me about that.
You've just turned this episode into another hate fest.
Yeah. To set the record straight, I don't know if he sexually abused people or not, and neither do you, unless you are one of the alleged victims. But the evidence is pretty strong. Anyway, so when that happened, the amount of people who want to believe that Michael Jackson is innocent is so strong, and with Armstrong, it was the same. And so we're all susceptible to that. But with education and awareness, we can become better at being able to say, well, maybe, with both things, not with doping, but also, more importantly, it was sexual abuse for kids. The U.S. Anti-Doping Agency concluded that Armstrong had been using performance-enhancing drugs over the course of his career. So it wasn't just a one-time test. It was like a full investigation, talking to people, blah, blah. And they're just like, actually, not only has he been using over his entire career mostly, that he was also the ringleader of, quote, the most sophisticated, professionalized, and successful doping program that sport has ever seen.
Oh my God, I never heard that part.
Yeah, so he was the ringleader. Wow. He was stripped of all of his achievements from 1998 onward, including his 7 Tour de France titles. He has a lifetime ban from all sports that follow the World Anti-Doping Code. This includes things like marathons.
Right.
So he can't even run in a marathon.
So he can't sign up for like the Boston Marathon or something.
No. In fact, he's come out saying that he thinks this is ridiculous because when he runs a marathon, he can raise a lot of money for charities, and he thinks that it's terrible that they would deny charities money, blah, blah, blah. I think he just wants to compete still. You know?
Well, I wonder if they could make a deal. Like, sure, you got to keep under this or above this pace, and then you can run. So that, like you won't win, but you can run.
2013 Oprah interview. He finally admitted it was all true. And he said he started doping all the way back in 1995. Wow. Several drugs. He says, quote, I am deeply flawed and I'm paying the price for it. And I think that's okay. I deserve this, he says. So this is him. So some would say, wow, he came forward and admitted it, which is great. But you have to understand, it had been decades of him lying and lying and lying. And after everyone knew it to be true, he admitted it finally. So that's important to take note of.
With things like that, it's like you still want to encourage the person to finally just say it, right? You want to do that. But you can't get too much credit for doing that. It's like, okay, so you did it. And now you finally know it, but we already knew it. But thanks for finally admitting it. But that's about it. You don't get special credit.
Right. Some credit, because some people never admit it.
Right.
We can think of examples of people who never admitted what everyone knew to be true. And so I absolutely give him credit for that. I mean, we tend to think, well, of course he admitted it because everyone knew. It's like, no, there are plenty of people who just hold on to it till the day they die. Bill Cosby, for example, they also, Oprah and Lance Armstrong also talked about the bullying issue, which I think to me is actually more important to know. Yeah. Because like we talked about, actors, all sports, pretty much, there's performance-enhancing drug use, but the bullying, the intimidation. So they had a conversation about that.
Right, because the fact that he used and then got stripped, okay, that affects him and his family. It affects other athletes that were competing that maybe were clean, but the bullying is a very direct aggression to those teammates and to those families, and it's
could cause like PTSD and stuff.
Totally.
Oprah, were you a bully? Armstrong, yeah, I was a bully. Oprah, tell me how you were a bully. Lance Armstrong, I was a bully in the sense that I tried to control the narrative, and if I didn't like what someone said, and for whatever reasons in my own head, whether I viewed that as someone being disloyal or a friend turning on you or whatever, I tried to control that and said, that's a lie, they're liars. Oprah, is that your nature? When somebody says something that you don't like, you go on the attack? Armstrong, my entire life. Oprah, your entire life? Lance Armstrong, my entire life. So this points to that early issue with him, perhaps being, modeled by his mom. Oprah, so you were doing that when you were 10 years old, 12 years old, and 14 years old? Lance Armstrong, it's interesting. I grew up, as most people know, we grew up as fighters. My mom was young when she had me. She sort of always felt like maybe it wasn't reality, but we felt like we had our backs against the wall the whole time. So I was always a fighter. My mom was always a fighter, still a fighter. Before my diagnosis, I would say I was a competitor, but I wasn't a fierce competitor. And in an odd way, that process turned me into a person that's gonna, it was truly win at all costs. When I was diagnosed and I was being treated, I said, I will do anything I have to do to survive. And that's good. And I took that attitude, that ruthless and relentless and win at all costs attitude, and I took it right into cycling because quite frankly, it followed it up almost immediately. And that's bad. Oprah. But you'd already been doing drugs before that. Doing drugs meaning taking banned substances. Lance Armstrong. Correct. But I wasn't a bully before that. So right here, I don't know, he's sort of being weird because he's like, so if we're to take his word for it, he always had a sort of element of a fighter and maybe a little bit of a dick growing up. But after going through the real trauma of almost dying and all the, at such a young age, 25, that's when he really ramped up his competitive streak and that's when he really amped up his bullying.
One thing that comes to mind, I don't know if this happens to you. It happens to me, and I've certainly been victimized, if you will, by happening to other people. So there's been times in my life when I get really on a solid schedule and everything I'm supposed to be doing that day, I'm doing it. And I'm waking up early and I'm working out, and I'm doing my work and I'm doing everything. And I just get on like this train. And after a couple days or a few days of this, I start feeling like I'm the man, and I know, and like, okay, now, like I feel like I've been doing this the whole time, and therefore, if I see someone slacking, I'm gonna let them have it. And
really?
Like, not bullying, but more of a kind of bullying, kind of like, what's wrong with you? Why are you not doing this? Almost like, I've been like this the whole time. I'm perfect, and you're not. Mm-hmm. And I experienced the same thing. Like when I was in college, I had a roommate my first year, Shun, and we would work out together. We would do things, and Shun got in this mode where he was like ultra disciplined, and he would practice his guitar every day and do all these things. And then he'd see me slacking a bit, and he would get, like you could see him trying to like maybe encourage me, but instead it was sort of a guilt, like shaming me. And I could relate later when I would do the same things to someone else. And I wonder if there was this factor where he started feeling like, look, I've survived cancer. I've done all these things. What's wrong with you? You better do this. You better, maybe kind of this self-righteousness.
2015, they made a movie about him called The Program, biopic, if you will, starring Ben Foster. Do you know what other movies he's been in?
Oh, yeah. Ben Foster. I love him. He was in Alpha Dog.
Okay.
And he was a great character in that. He's also been like in some war movie, I think, or something. But
yeah,
what else he's been in?
The movies that I like that I could think of, he was in X-Men. He was Angel.
Oh right, yeah.
He was in 3:10 to Yuma. He was, which I love the beginning. The ending I thought was silly. Hell or High Water. That's a big movie for him. Mm-hmm. Did you ever see that?
No.
Him and Chris Pine.
Oh wait, yeah.
And
they're driving around in
Jeff Bridges.
Yeah, yes, I did see that. That was great.
And Leave No Trace, which I don't think you've seen. It came out last year. Him and his daughter live in the woods outside Portland, and CPS gets involved. It's really sad. He's a war vet in that one too. 2018, lots of lawsuits over the years. He loses millions upon millions of dollars. 2019, today, he seems to bounce back from it all. He's interviewed a lot. He, like when I thought about doing this episode, I thought, well, Lance Armstrong must be obscure now. He must be pushed out of society, pushed out of the media. But from what I can tell, like everyone's treating him like as if it never happened. Not that I think they necessarily should, because I don't know, but because it's not like he raped kids or drugged people or anything like that. He did bully people, which maybe he should be held more accountable for that. But he did come forward and admit it, so whatever. But anyway, for example, there's this new episode on Architectural Digest in which they highlight his Aspen house. It's just a show where they go into rich people's homes.
Oh, okay, like Cribs or something.
Yeah, and
Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous.
Exactly. So he's on a lot of things. Did you know he has a podcast?
No.
called the Forward Podcast.
What?
He interviews people like Sammy Hagar, Charles Barkley, etc.
Oh, so he's like doing great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Interview with him. I'm well aware my presence is not an easy topic, and so I encourage people, if they want to give me a high five, great. If you want to shoot me the bird, that's okay too. I'm a big boy. I made the bed. I get to sleep in it. Do we respect that?
I mean, yeah. First of all, like, the guy was a top tier athlete, like I said, with or without the performance drugs. Fine. Now, with the performance drugs, he was definitely violating the rules and stuff like that. The big problem, as I said, is that he lied and incriminated and bullied the others and stuff like that. Now, he was found guilty. He came out. He said, yes, he did it, all these things. And he's basically not now still trying to make excuses or deny it. Fine. He raised more money for charity than anyone else, probably.
But the bullying.
Yeah, well, I don't know if he apologized to them. He didn't bully me, let's say, right? So that might be between him and them.
Yeah.
I don't know how much I don't have enough information to keep like recriminating him over that stuff.
All right. So people often want us to comment on diagnosis, and people are diagnosing him online all the time. And I just want to be clear, no one can diagnose him without a proper evaluation. Psychopathy, narcissistic personality disorder in particular, require many hours of assessment by someone who knows what they're doing, which is a very rare sort of thing. Right. So there's really no way to know. But as a point of education, which I think is actually helpful for people to know, because people are throwing around these terms like they know what they're talking about, I thought we would go over diagnosing the very little we know from the internet, which should be taken with a planet-size grain of salt. So
clearly it's agoraphobia.
So is he a psychopath? So let's go one by one here. Actually, my notes are all kind of messed up, so I'm going to change something. Okay. So we're going to use the hair measure, which is the 20-item measure. Number one, pathological lying. Is he a pathological liar, Humberto?
I mean, he was lying to everyone's face extremely aggressively for many years.
Yeah.
I don't know if he lies outside of that context, if he's still lying, but there was a lot of evidence.
So he was absolutely lying, but it's within a certain context. Mm-hmm. Everyone using performance-enhancing drugs is lying about it. Everyone who cheats is lying. Everyone who wears Spanx and doesn't want to admit it is lying. There's a lot of lying that people do. It's not pathological lying. Like you said, do we know if he was lying in other contexts?
Sure.
Pathological, psychopathic lying, they lie all the time. Sure. Not literally, but they'll lie about little things. Yeah. Like you walk into a room and you notice that the dishes have been emptied out of the dishwasher. Yeah. And you're like, who emptied the dishes? And the pathological liar would be like, I don't know. Wasn't me. Yeah. Because it's this knee-jerk reaction. It's not a functional lying, and what we call instrumental lying, which is actually somewhat logical. Right.
It's the kind of lies that would get you in trouble for tweets that have lies that you didn't even have to lie about.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's a good example. So
no, we don't have exactly that evidence. We have evidence that he
potentially lied
aggressively and definitely for a long time lied about that subject.
Just that subject. Yeah. We don't. Now, maybe he did, but there's no evidence on the internet.
We don't know.
Of it. 2, glib and superficial charm.
I actually haven't seen that from. Like, that's the one thing is I don't remember. He doesn't seem that way. He seems more like serious and like he'll answer a question. He was never like, hey, what's up? So glad to be here today.
Right. Ted Bundy is a classic example. Right. 3, cunning and manipulative.
Sounds like he was. He was at least cunning and manipulative because he ran apparently the biggest, most sophisticated blah, 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 and manipulated and bullied a whole bunch of people. I mean, come on. How are you going to define it otherwise?
It's just not classic. So we went over this previous, is that in order to compete in a sport that he wanted to compete in. He had to play the game just like everyone else did.
I don't buy it because all his other teammates apparently didn't reach these levels of manipulativeness and connivingness.
True.
So
a little bit,
Yeah.
but nothing compared to Ted Bundy, okay?
Okay, but we can rate him at some level.
Which we will at the end.
Okay.
4, grandiose sense of self.
Yes.
Right. Maybe. It's hard to know exactly, but that's a definite maybe right there. 5, need for stimulation.
Yes.
Hard to say. Maybe.
This is another one we ran into, but like, if
It's because, again, we just don't have the data. Do we have some data that he was, well, again, need for stimulation is like drug use, sexual behaviors, wanting to jump off of a thing and hurt yourself. Like,
wanting to endure agonizing pain for weeks on end.
but again, that's being a cyclist. We're talking about a culture of context. It's like looking at someone and saying, oh, well, that guy killed 5 people. He's a psychopath. Well, what if he was a soldier in World War II? You have to look at the context. The context of cycling, that's what everyone does. So are they all psychopaths in recycling? Now, are people who have a need for stimulation more likely to become one of those kinds of sporto people? Maybe. I don't know.
Oh, that's fair. I kind of look at it like, these are different categories, and you're not just talking about, well, people that are in the cycling world cycle a lot. We're talking about like the elite of the elite, right, that go above and beyond. And so to some extent, these people, probably all of like the top 100 or some of them, have a need for massive amounts of that input into
But
their
that's not
system.
necessarily psychopathic input.
No, it's not necessarily, but it
that's the
is
point,
one
yeah.
variable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'd have to see it in another context. Like when we look at cunning and manipulative, for example,
Yeah.
we see it not only in his, press lying, but also in behind the scenes reports. That's always the key. Like if we had a description from Donald Trump's wife about what Donald Trump is like when it's just the two of them behind closed doors, then we'd have a better idea as to like what's really going on there. Anyway, number 6, callousness and lack of empathy.
It sounds like, again, just from the reports, there's some amount of that.
A little bit, for sure.
You know, he threatens people. He threatens to kill people. He threatens the wives of the people.
Right.
And he didn't really care that he was calling out people as liars and threatening them publicly when he knew he was guilty.
Right. If you compare him to other people who denied performance-enhancing drugs, he was particularly ruthless, not only in front of the camera, but particularly behind the scenes.
Right.
7, lack of remorse or guilt.
So that's an interesting one because from what you said about, I didn't really watch the Oprah interview, but what you read and the way it feels and the way I remember things, it's more of a, fine, yeah, this is me, I'm just flawed. Rather than, oh my God, I'm so sorry. You know, like this kind of thing.
Yeah, so on the spectrum of things, I would put him at a level of some remorse and some guilt, but not no guilt and not the sort of guilt I would have if I had done such a thing and had to admit it on national TV.
Right. And there's the difference between, man, I really screwed up things, didn't I? I had all those wins. And there's a difference between that and, oh my God, I've defrauded so many people.
Now, we don't know.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, we don't know what he did behind the scenes.
Right. Fair enough.
But on Oprah, he absolutely came forward. Again, if he was more down the spectrum of psychopathy, in all likelihood, he would just double down and say, no, they're all lying. And in fact, the Olympic Committee who found me to be using performance-enhancing drugs, it's all rigged.
Right.
Fake news.
Yeah, absolutely. They would find some sort of like...
Yeah.
They would find some sort of like professor, maybe an ex-editor of psychology today, to come out and say that Google and Apple and Facebook and everyone actually rigged millions and millions of votes towards Hillary Clinton.
Right.
Something like that.
So, and when he talks on the Oprah show in the interview, he comes across like someone who's genuinely remorseful about what he did.
Okay.
Now, while he was bullying, he didn't seem to be remorseful. That to bully someone, to threaten, to write in an email, again allegedly, that I'm going to put a bullet in your head, that takes a special sort of lack of remorse, right? Now, you could argue that he was so narcissistically triggered that it very much overrode his robust compassion for other people. Hard to know. You'd have to know more about him. Sure. Number 8, failure to accept responsibility.
It's a tough one. I mean, he kind of did.
Right. So it's hard to say. Like I was talking about before, all doping athletes deny the use of this sort of thing. So, there's that. Yeah. But again, the bullying and then the continual denial. But he did, accept responsibility on Oprah. It's hard to say.
It's just some of the comments. The reason I didn't see the Oprah one. So you actually, I'll believe you. It's just that some of the other comments like, hey, if I see someone and they want to high five me, that's great. If they want to give me the finger, I get it. I made my bed. I'm going to sleep in it. And again, just that one comment is not enough for anything. But I get this feeling of like, hey, man, that's just me.
No, I don't think that's his attitude. Okay. The way he comes across, he's not like, hey, man, that's not my read of it. He's saying, and I think it's accurate because he's not Bill Cosby.
Right.
He's not O.J. Simpson.
Right.
He used performance enhancing drugs, which they all did. Maybe
and lied and bullied about it.
And lied, which they all do.
Yeah.
The bullying was not cool, and he admitted. He's like, yeah, that was wrong. Yeah. Here's why I did it, but I mean, I was just so focused on winning that I did it, but that was wrong. And so I think with that statement, he's appropriate. Like, hey man, if you want to high five me for raising $500 million and competing at such a high level with other people who were, according to him, using performance enhancing drugs, then you can high five me. If you want to give me the finger for letting everyone down and lying to everyone and bullying people, then that makes sense to me. I deserve that. I think it's pretty. I'm not saying I respect him because he's a dick who bullied people.
Sure.
But on the scale of the people that we attack online, I think he's one of the better ones. He's one of the better dicks of the people online. You know what I mean? Number 9, shallow emotional response.
Again, that's what I'm reading into some of the comments, but it sounds like from your perspective, no.
Well, there's no clear evidence of it anyway. 10, parasitic lifestyle.
No.
11, poor behavioral controls.
No.
Yeah, maybe the bullying.
Oh, sure.
But not in general. Otherwise,
I guess the way I was thinking about it was the amount of discipline he had to have.
Yeah,
to do what he did.
So a typical psychopathic poor behavioral control would be just someone bothers you and you just destroy your life trying to get back at them.
Right.
Anyway,
I just don't think that you can be that organized and that focused and that committed all those years and have like
poor behavior
self-destruct. Yeah.
Right. 12, irresponsibility.
No.
13, impulsivity.
Maybe
again, the bullying is the only thing we have. Yeah. Again, if you're an impulsive-ish person, it's going to be hard to train for things like
That's
that.
That's fair.
14, many short-term marital relationships.
He had a few, but like famous people are generally
not only famous
accosted
people,
all the time by
lots of people.
What I mean, absolutely. What I mean is that it is the least unusual thing in the world for famous people to get married and divorced a few times.
Right. And for anyone, to be clear. 15, sexual promiscuity.
Not that we know of.
16, early behavioral problems.
He says he had some.
But not on the level that I think we would normally see in a psychopath, like with Jeffrey Dahmer, for example. 17, lack of realistic long-term goals.
No.
18, juvenile delinquency.
Not that we know of.
19, revocation of conditional release, which is
absolutely
for prison people. 20, criminal versatility.
No, not the way that you've explained it to me before.
Not at all.
Although, okay, fair enough. Because we've had this discussion though. One of the issues that I've taken in the past is that it and or you give preference to blue collar criminal versatility, whereas. Well, it seemed that way because like the amount of criminal versatility it takes to run the most organized, highest sophisticated ring of performance enhancing drugs.
It's not an issue of charges or counts, you know.
Sure.
It's an issue of where it comes from. So we're not looking at the behavior. With psychopathy, it's a personality disorder. So you're looking at like, how does it happen?
Yeah.
So why did he use performance enhancing drugs? Not because he was a psychopath, but because everyone does it to compete. So, and how do you sustain that practice? Well, you gotta commit a lot of crimes, so to speak. I don't even know if they're crimes, but anyway. So, criminal versatility in a psychopath is you shoplift because you want things and you feel entitled and you don't have any remorse and you don't care. You also punch people in the face that you don't like. You also write bad checks because you just want to get away with that, and you're impulsive and you don't have any long-term goals. You also steal from the till at the restaurant that you got a job at that day. You also try to you steal from your neighbors because you see, he's got a bike in the backyard. That's criminal versatility. Okay. Now you could call those blue collar. So let me put it into a white collar situation. You're a super rich CEO dude
of Enron,
and so you take things home from work, like your computer, or you go into the office next door, and you take someone's Mickey Mantle signed baseball. You also like to scam people online, like the Fire Festival guy. Yeah. Like that's criminal versatility, where it's like the amount of you just get this sense like they're always trying to get something going, and they just have this thought in their head like, ooh, I could scam people in that way.
And that's why I feel like, and maybe you've clarified it, because when I think of like the Enron few guys at the top, if that's not criminal versatility, I just don't get it, because like they were constantly scamming to see how can we basically squeeze fake money out of the system. Well, irrelevant if people die in outages, irrelevant if,
Well, I don't know. I haven't looked into them, so I can't speak
But it was
to
stuff
that.
like they've set up whole divisions that were like.
What we're talking about is Lance Armstrong. So,
no, I know.
So
I just
all his crimes from
fair
what
enough.
you and I know about, there could be billions more that we don't and that other people do. But all of Lance Armstrong's crimes were centered around this one thing.
Sure.
So that's not versatility. Okay. So on a spectrum, so we've started to rate everyone out of 10. I can't remember where. I think like R. Kelly was like a 3 or 4 or something. I can't remember. But now again, this is not actually a scientific diagnosis. I, as an ethical clinician, cannot diagnose from afar. This is a ridiculous practice. It's a silly thing. What we're quote unquote diagnosing is what is on the internet that I had time enough to actually find. So it's a totally dumb thing. But if we were to put Lance Armstrong character that we could see on the internet on the spectrum from 1 to 10, with 10 being Ted Bundy and 1 being, Mother Teresa, but I heard she was actually kind of an interesting person. What number would we put him at?
I would probably put him at a 3 as well.
Right. For the threats, mainly, honestly, to be able to threaten people with their lives and to threaten your teammates' wives. I mean, imagine, and these are not necessarily impulsive things. Some of them were, but some of them were planned out. Like he was going to get you. That is clear. You have to not have some deeper, robust sense of remorse.
Yeah.
That will, even though you have the impulse and you want to do it, you say, ugh, or you do it once and you're like, oh my God, that I feel I gotta. Something's got to happen here. I got to reel this back. He did this for years, systematically to many people. Now, it wasn't on the level of what other bullies are going to do, but it was definitely in that direction. And to me, that clearly puts him on the spectrum. But when we look at all the 20 items of psychopathy, we're talking vast majority of them. He doesn't, on the internet anyway, endorse any of this. The dark tetrad, we have the 4 traits of psychopathy, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and sadism, because I get questions about this sometimes. All these traits correlate with each other. We call it the dark tetrad. We already talked about psychopathy. What about narcissism?
Yeah, a bit.
So probably on the spectrum a little bit. Again, a need to be admired as a defense against the attachment insecurity and the just general insecurity he has as a kid. Machiavellian.
Absolutely.
Machiavellian.
This is what I've been looking for. I think this is the one I'm looking for. This is the one that I want to put a lot of people that are not dysfunctional psychopaths, but have essentially, they are organized, unempathizing beasts, you know? And I think in this case, he's not extreme, but he definitely was a schemer in this field, you know?
Yeah.
Again, you know, just
it's hard for me to know because I wish I was there, obviously.
Yeah.
You know, to witnessing it because, again, you could call A-Rod and, you know, Canseco, all these people on the spectrum of Machiavellianism as well, which I don't think is really that type of personality.
But if they were called ringleaders and the biggest, most organized, so blah, blah, blah.
That's what I'd like to see what that actually looked like.
Yeah.
Because if it was just, because the thing is there's a version of the story where 95% of the people who were in that quote unquote, you know, circle ringleader situation were all desperate to use whatever they needed to actually win. And they were like, well, can someone take control of this process? Because we need someone to take the lead on, you know, how we're going to get all these drugs or processes or whatever, how we're going to make sure we pass the test. And Lance Armstrong, being the leader of the team, actually said, well, I'm going to do that. Or he suggested, I'll do that. So it's hard to know if it was an organization, like, you know, I'm the ringleader of this podcast, but you wouldn't call me Machiavelli. You know, you would just say, I'm just leading. I'm making plans.
You haven't seen him behind the scenes.
Yeah. So the what I would want to see is, you know, him quietly thinking, okay, how do I manipulate the press? How do I bully this person? How do I trick that thing? And it's sort of an obsession for him of how do I maneuver, not only in cycling, but in all aspects of life. How do I get my wife to do what I want her to do? How do I get my kids to get, you know, that's what these dark tetrad people do. Is you might even know people like this where they'll do things and you'll realize, whoa, you've been thinking about this. You didn't actually just come to me and say, hey, I want this, or this upset me or something. They did a plan, and it's dysfunctional. That's the whole thing. This dark tetrad, it's dysfunctional. It doesn't help you. It's not like good planners, are the people who have Machiavellianism. Machiavellianism in this context is people who actually dysfunctionally plan defensively because they believe if they don't, they're never going to get any of their needs met, you know? So it's hard to say with him. I wish I knew him more. Did in the colloquial sense, in the broader sense, what did he possess? Was he Machiavellian? Yeah, but not in the dark tetrad quintessential sense.
So maybe we still need something else that maybe is not categorized as being outside the norm, but should be. Because, you know,
he's a dick.
No, yeah, what I mean is most people, and maybe it's because they don't have the opportunity, but most people are not criminals, let's say. Most people are not criminals. A minority of human beings are criminals. And out of that percentage of criminals, some percentage of them really don't care about other people, and they will just do anything they can. But some percentage of those are really good at it, and they are organized, and they, you know, basically have large organizations that succeed for years and years and years doing it.
Well,
and I wonder if that's within the norm of psychology, or if there's something wrong in their head.
So I'm glad you're bringing this up, because a lot of lay people will email me and say things in a less sophisticated manner than that you are right now. And here's the thing. It's not even just a matter of threshold because, well, it's a matter of threshold, but it's not just that. So the reason why for some of you out there, you might be feeling this tension that Humberto's feeling right now, where it's like, well, we clearly need to say there's something wrong with him because he did all these bad things. A lot of people do bad things. You out there have done bad things. Now, you can label it as bad things. You can say that there was a psychological component to that. You can add a label to that. Insecurity, attachment issues, trauma. You can use those labels. But when you're using diagnostic labels, these are well defined in our field. And in our field, we tend to apply labels to things that have significant difference from other people, that are dysfunctional, that are global to the person. When we're talking about dark tetrad and psychopathy, we're talking about a personality. We're not talking about a behavior.
Yeah.
You and I have lied before. We've stolen before.
Right.
We've made plans against other people. We've been a dick before. Do we call ourselves, is it something global to my personhood that contributed to that is dysfunctional and out of the norm? No. Everyone's insecure. Everyone gets hurt. Everyone will lie when they're in a pinch, or everyone can lack remorse sometimes. But when we're applying these labels, we have to understand that we're talking about something, quite particular. And if we start applying it to everyone, then it loses its meaning. And the other thing is people don't understand the range, that there's a spectrum, shall we say, of dark tetrad, and people tend to squish the range. They'll be like I got an email from someone recently. It was I read this story in the news about this police officer who was caught planting evidence in dozens of cases. Can you tell me why this police officer has sadistic personality disorder? And that's that misunderstanding of, you're just looking at one behavior. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that behavior. The context, bad decision-making, stupid, pressure from their boss, everyone else was doing it, that people don't like to consider. What we like to do is we see a bad behavior and we want to apply a diagnosis. Some kind of wiring is wrong. Something's wrong with that brain. And that is actually not only not the way we talk, but it's a very messed up way of looking at why people do the things that they do. We do the things that we do for a lot of reasons, one of which has to do with, quote unquote, what's wrong with our brain, but a lot of it also has to do with context and interesting sort of neutral psychological concepts like the way we're raised and the amount of need we have to get into something. And so that's why but again, to return to the last thing and then I'll shut up, is we want to reserve these psychological labels for what they were intended for and what they're clearly defined as in my field. It'd be like physicians who walk, like we walk, this is probably an easier analogy. It's like, ooh, my arm hurts. I have broken bones. That's what it's like for me to hear.
Sure.
When people are like, oh, this person lied, they're a psychopath. It's like, it's exactly the same as if a physician heard, I have a hurt on my arm. I have a broken arm. I need an amputation. It's that silly to me.
Right. So I definitely get that, and I'm 100% on board with you about keeping the definitions to what they're meant to be in the field. Totally. What I am noticing, the more we talk through this, is, and this could be wrong, but it seems to me like the focus of the whole field is mostly on, we label things as wrong, quote unquote, if they are for various number or
use a different word.
Okay, we label things as a diagnosis of some sort.
A disorder.
A disorder, generally, if they're damaging to the individual or those immediately around them. Mm-hmm. Okay. What's interesting to me is, you look at someone like Putin, who is a hyper-successful human being, uber organized, very in good health. He exercises plenty. He's in good shape. He excelled in his field in the KGB, and now he runs the country, and he's probably the richest man in the world. But as a human, I look at it and I'm like, that is one dangerous, outside of the norm human. But he's not damaging. He's not like, all these things like, well, we don't know, but presumably he's not a...
if there was something wrong with his personality or he had a disorder, then he wouldn't just do it in that visible political, context. He would do it all the time.
Yeah, right. So my point is...
With his spouse, with his kids,
right.
with his friends, with his coworkers, in ways that wouldn't make any sense.
Totally. So let's assume, because we don't have the evidence, let's assume that's not the case. Because in fact, he seems hyper successful as a human being. So at least we know he's not a fuck.
So let's say in his regular life, he's a kind, wonderful person.
To his family, stuff like that. But it's just that he makes decisions that affect, say, outside of his family circle, with killing people, potentially getting us to the verge of war, all these kinds of things, right? Imprisoning gays, all the things he does, right? I feel like there is something that is outside of some bell curve for humans that should be labeled, and it is brain related. And I don't think we have a language for that.
But it's not accurate.
But why not?
Because one...
It's outside of the norm. For sure.
And
it's damaging to society.
It's outside the norm behaviorally.
Right. And it's damaging to society. Just the thing is that we are in the field,
in psychology, we're not interested in those kinds of things.
That's my point. That's what I've realized now, is that's outside of the scope of what psychology seems to be interested in.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's a gap. Because that is, if anything...
let me ask you, what's the compulsion to add a psychological label to that? Why not just call him what you would call him, which is like, and I don't know enough about Putin, but for a destructive politician, why not just call them a terrible, destructive person?
Right, because let's say we could fast forward to...
Why do you need a psychological label?
Right. So let's say we could fast forward n number of years to the point where we had labeled it. We had, in fact, traced back a lot of the root causes for such a person. And we could actually, through modifications of our educations, the way that we teach people how to parent and everything, reduce the percentage of people that end up being that kind of person. Then it would be useful.
Okay.
That's my point.
But we don't need a psychological label for that. We could call it a propensity for terrible politics.
Well, if you want to invent a different field that's more focused on the damage to society versus the individual and those around them, that's fine. Well, but I'm saying we need something like that.
Okay. It'd be wonderful. Believe me, psychology would absolutely be interested in that, and is, in that if there was a test that could somehow differentiate politicians who were going to, quote unquote, harm the world. But you understand, Donald Trump was elected by the United States citizens tree. So, never mind about Putin, but there are people out there who would say you could and I'm guessing you would too, just graft Trump instead of Putin in that whole conversation.
Well, actually, I would mostly, but I would have an easier time still sticking to normal psychology with Trump, because he's actually been dysfunctional in so many aspects of his life. It's just he's had money to cover up the dysfunction for all of his life.
But my point is that, that your wish for a label that would be easily applied to human beings so that we could screen them out of politics, for example. We kind of already have that, essentially. We could have, someone when Trump was, say, 50 years old, could have sat down with him and actually evaluated. In fact, I think someone did. And, but what kind of world would that be, right?
But again, the reason I don't see Trump and Putin in the same boat is
well, forget about that. But your spirit is psychology. Your indictment on psychology is, as I'm a representative of, apparently, that there should be a psychological system of labeling things for the betterment of society, particularly for CEOs and people in power, politicians. We have that kind of. we don't have the ability, because it'd be really hard to research because of people look at Trump differently, right? It's a subjective thing that people do. How do you measure a good politician versus a bad politician? It's hard, by what measure? That's a very difficult question to answer. Everyone has their own sense of that, and I think there's good philosophy behind certain answers. But we could do that maybe, and then you enact that, and then you have some law that says if, say, 2 out of 3 psychologists deem you unworthy to be a politician, that you're barred from that sort of thing?
No. That's definitely not what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is, first of all, not an indictment on psychology. I'm saying that neither medicine nor psychology nor sociology nor any other field has actually studied or done any advancements in probably the single most damaging element to human history, which is these individuals that are actually not fitting the profile of a psychopath necessarily. They might have some narcissistic elements, maybe a little.
They have. So it's not, but it's not in the realm of psychology. It's in the realm of sociology and social psychology. So we absolutely study in various different fields, akin or even within psychology, the very well documented, well thought over, well written, hard to research, but a lot of intelligent people looking at how Hitler came to power, how mobs produce certain kinds of things, how a scared populace increases conservatism, how a group of others can be targeted by a high conflict individual and scapegoated so that scared people can feel more secure and can be blamed. This is well documented. Sure. This is well written about. This is well researched. But guess what? No one cares.
Well, what I'm saying is absolutely that we know about these things, but there's certainly no mechanism. There's no mechanism to identify a psychopath early on that's reliable, right? Like, it's not like we could screen people with a little device and be like, oh, 60% possibility of psychopathism. Like,
well, you say that, but a little shade up from that, by the time someone's 16, 17 years old, there are experts who could absolutely put a percentage on the chance that this person's going to be consistently a psychopath for the rest of their life.
I realize what I'm saying is completely idealistic, but imagine that we could have identified enough elements about education, parenting, society, blah, blah, blah. Just like we talk about like indoctrinating people about misogyny and things like that, right? Like, what I'm trying to get at is, if we could prevent that brand of person that is actually highly functional, but just doesn't give a fuck about others other than outside their immediate family circle. If we can minimize those people in general, not because we put them in prison, just because we change our process after having identified what are the mental things that lead you down that path, that would be extremely useful.
So that's not psychology's fault.
No, I understand why you're taking it. I'm saying, as we've talked about this,
but that's not psychology's fault.
I'm 100% agreeing with you. We shouldn't mislabel things, use the labels that already exist for other things. Totally. I'm also not saying, hey, it's psychology's fault. I'm kind of identifying, hey, man, there's this thing that is science fiction, of course, but imagine if we could reduce the number of these people.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever thought about this before until we meandered our way here.
Yeah.
But in a perfect world, what would it look like with today's technology? What would it look like?
It might look like a little bit.
Here's what it would look like. So it wouldn't be once someone's running for president, it would be at ground level. So, and it wouldn't be preventing them from being politicians. It would be like say someone is middle management of Microsoft.
Yeah.
And on one path, without any kind of intervention, through their Machiavellianism and their bullying and their lying and their psychopathy and lack of remorse, they rise to CEO and proceed to abuse everyone and use their power for bad and hurt the world and this kind of thing. Well, once they get to power, there's so many politics and issues with well, you're just saying that because you don't like my decisions. So it would start lower where they are, at rank 3 out of 15, and someone comes in and tests everyone, perhaps even to some extent, confidentially, and identifies certain individuals who have a propensity to this, and actually goes to that individual and says, by the way, I just want to let you know, you have this thing, and if you don't modify it or work on it, you're going to hurt a lot of people. Most psychopaths actually, unless you're a sadist, which is kind of rare, they actually aren't super interested in harming other people. They just don't care.
Yeah.
If you're in their way, then they'll hurt you. So if they actually know they're a psychopath, few psychopaths actually know they're a psychopath. So they know they actually don't care about other people's feelings. But intellectually, they're like, well, but I don't want to harm other people. One, because it lessens my chance of success in the world, but also because why? Like, from what I understand, it's a bad thing to hurt other people, And so you can actually work with them and say, let's try to work on this. And then that assessor will confidentially know that person and then watch them and see how they do. And then if they actually start to enact harm around them, then they're like, look, dude, you're taking this to another level.
Yeah.
I'm going to start, I have the power to start actually notifying people around you and coaching them on how to react to you, because what you just did right there was bullying, it was victimizing, and that person doesn't feel like they have the power to fight back, and you kind of knew that. So let's work on this, okay? I have the power over you.
Right.
This is like, what oligarchy, so it'd be a psychogarchy. And of course this wouldn't work, but in terms of rights and the way our society works. But if you had good actors, good psychologists, and a system that supported that, I could absolutely see that working.
Right. Well, and one simple example, for example, is we have a system of capitalism that's not just capitalism as in you have a good idea, you try to market it. If people like it, they'll buy it, you'll make money. It's got this super layer, in fact, several super layers that are not really a free market concept. It's we're going to make fictitious bets on things, and those fictitious bets are going to make way more money for people than the actual products, than the actual underlying products. And we're going to make it even harder, because here's what we're going to say. When you have a company and it's publicly traded, you can't just do well that year because you sold the same amount of great products you did last year and your customers are happy. That's a failing company. In fact, you can't just make more money than last year. That's a failing company. You have to beat the projections of how much more money you were going to make than last year. Right. And when you set up a system like that, it's going to attract that element. And that element is going to do very well in that
Not
system.
only attract, but it privileges that element.
It does, yeah.
Right. So if you are a stockholder, do you want the nice person who has remorse? No, you want the person who is going to stomp on everyone to make money for the business, because you don't see all that harm they do. All you see is your stock go up.
Yeah.
So that's a problem in our society. Yeah. So again, sociologists, psychologists, philosophers, thinkers have known about this for decades, if not centuries, and have tried to get society to change on this. And guess what?
Fair enough. So I think that is true, that there are some fields that try actively to modify the way society works, and they have some successes and a lot of failures because it's so hard. And
well, it's only hard because we make it hard to ourselves. We pay attention to things that we pay attention to. If society paid attention to this kind of thinking, then we would vote for people and we would pressure our politicians are just doing what we want them to do, and we could change society if we wanted to.
It's just a moving wheel that we're a part of. So it's like, it's hard to have a meta-analysis when you're in the middle of the thing.
Yeah.
And so, okay, fair enough.
But we pay attention to money, and boy, are we good at that. We don't pay attention to the environment. We're not very good at that. We don't pay attention to privileging psychopaths. We could do it. I believe we can. We've changed society. Most Americans support gay marriage. That was not true 30 years ago. We can change a lot of things. Final word on Lance Armstrong.
Like a lot of athletes and people who excel in their field, he was very inspirational. And I think that there's some things that he's done, irrelevant of his lying and the bullying, that, have been tremendously helpful. Like $500 million raised for various things. And, a lot of people drew inspiration from him anyways. And I'm sure that there were a lot of interactions where he personally touched people in a positive way. At the same time, there's no excuse for the bullying. It feels like he really affected some families. So that I hope he tried to make amends with personally with those folks. I think that, like you said, it's not on the same level as someone who's murdered people or raped women for decades and things like that. Nowhere near. So at this point, maybe all the best for him.
When I started the deep dive, I barely knew anything about him. I was kind of even somewhat unaware of the Live Strong thing. I remember the yellow bracelets, but it was really not a part of my circle. So I learned so much about him. And on one level, I respect him a lot, actually. Not on the level of, say, I don't know, Jon Stewart or
Sure.
Bernie Sanders or Barack Obama. Try to get out of politics. Irvin Yalom, these people. I respect him as a person who works really hard in sports. I respect him as someone who bounced back from a pretty difficult PR problem. I respect him for doing all the charity work. I mean, he didn't have to do all that kind of stuff. So I respect him for that. He seems like a likable guy on the surface anyway. Hearing about the bullying, I've been bullied in the workplace. It's traumatic. It's awful. And when I get upset and when I get hurt and when I get angry, I might be terse and short with someone, but I'm never going to cross all the lines that Lance Armstrong had to cross. And to me, that is a deep immoral legacy and history that he perpetrated over many years, allegedly, according to a number of people, that he's responsible for, and there's no excuse. He grew up in a difficult situation, doesn't excuse it. A lot of people grow up in difficult situations and don't do that. He was a high competitor and he wanted to win. That's great. A lot of people go through that and still they don't treat other people horribly. I think that's a massive black mark on his life. And from the little I know of the press, I don't think he's done enough to correct for that. Maybe in the future he will. Maybe he'll come to terms with that and actually sit down with some of his accusers on his podcast, for example, and just really take ownership for what he did and deeply apologize. If he did that, then I'd say, okay, that's big respect from that. Again, you still did it, and that can't be changed. But
lead the charge trying to change the culture of the sports and the way that things are done.
Yeah. Well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Thanks for joining me out there. Please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.